Beginning with military advisors in the 1950s and escalating with combat troops in the early 1960s, especially following the Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964, United States involvement in Vietnam would claim more than 58,000 American lives. In total, nearly 2.6 million American men and women served in Vietnam. 4 local men were among that number, answering their country's call to duty in Southeast Asia: John Bultman, Gary Bussell, Robert Walradth, and Gerry Waite. Troops encountered a variety of terrain, climate, and enemy contact, so one veteran's Vietnam experience may be drastically different from another. Your Central Indiana Ford dealers take pride in honoring veterans from all wars by bringing you the stories of these 4 men, each awarded the Ford Oval of Honor in recognition of service to our country as defenders of freedom, and each truly being an American patriot. John Bultman's adoptive father had served as a Marine on Iwo Jima and Okinawa in World War II. In high school in Vincennes, knowing he would be drafted because of his low number, John decided to enlist. Although his first choice was either the Air Force or Navy, John ended up following his father's advice.
My dad said, well, you know you're going to go to Vietnam, so you might want to go where the training is the hardest and the best, and that would be the Marine Corps. And so I did. I questioned him when I was in boot camp if that was a wise decision, but it turned out that it was.
John went through training at Parris Island, South Carolina, and then traveled to Vietnam. Though it was hot in South Carolina, it didn't prepare John for his arrival in Southeast Asia.
The door opened, the hatch opened, and I stood there and stopped. Well, then I realized I wasn't the only one. We were all stopping. It's like, it just hits you. It almost like it slaps you in the face. And then you're sitting there going, damn, how hot is it? And the flight attendant, and we used to call them stewardesses in those days, which is great. Anyway, she goes, what's 110 degrees? It's a little balmy, you know, like that. And I'm going, really, 110 degrees? And she goes, that's the average. It doesn't get too much hotter. Get a little cooler. Cooler to them was 90 degrees.
Assigned to the 1st Marine Aircraft Wing, John was a teletype operator. But when that system wasn't working, he became a courier, carrying the messages between units by helicopter or jeep. On the advice of a brigadier general, John learned to memorize the messages rather than taking a paper copy, which could be dangerous. He
said, look, you would do well if you would try to remember these messages one at a time. You don't have to remember them all when you go out, and not take it with you. And he goes, you don't want to get caught with that. And then it occurred to me, I don't want to get caught with this, you know. And so I told him later, I said, make the message quick, make it short, so that I can remember, I can memorize it. They'd give it to me. I wouldn't talk to anybody until I got to where I had to say that message.
Committing the messages to memory was just one of the precautions John took in case he was captured.
I didn't wear chevrons, you know. I don't want to be done chevrons. They gave me a .45. I didn't like it. I carried a shotgun, and I had a knife, and that was my K-bar, you know. But I didn't want to get caught with a .45 because the officers wear .45s. And if I got caught, and they knew I had a top secret crypto clearance with top secret information on unit movement and a .45, I wouldn't be here.
When messages did have to be carried to units in the field, going by helicopter was the preferred method. But when there was no other way to deliver the message, John would get in his Jeep in the middle of the night, alone, headlights off, and head out, not knowing what might be between him and his destination.
I had to get the messages out. I just had to. And there was no aircraft, so it was like get in the Jeep and go. You know, I'm sitting there going, oh, geez, it's the middle of the night, you know. Many times I did it, and I'm thinking, I don't know if I'm going to get through this one.
As if it wasn't scary enough driving alone at night in Vietnam, occasionally John would run across another person on the road, which he felt certain was not right.
I was amazed because I just almost knew for a fact that that was not right, that person being out. And I thought, boy, if he wants me, he can have me, you know. So I would gun it, going by him, and I didn't kick him off the road or anything like that. I thought about it, but I thought, no, I'm not going to do that. And then if I noticed that I was coming back and the guy was still out there, then I would lock and load, and I'd let him hear me lock and load. I'd get close enough, let off on the gas, and go with that shotgun. They're very loud at night.
As nervous and scared as John was on these missions, perhaps his most frightening time was being at the Da Nang Air Base in 1968, when the North Vietnamese launched the Tet Offensive. John spent the next week in a bunker as fighting raged around the base.
I looked out, and there's a C-130 that was a two-prop C-130, the old type, was out in a distance, and it looked like a ray gun coming down. Well, that was Puff. That was the Gatling gun on the side of it. I'd never seen it. Then a B-52 strike on a hill down, and then the whole world's blown up around me. We had the Air Force involved. The Missouri, remember the Missouri? Was out in they were shooting rounds. They actually were shooting off, and you could hear these boom go over, you know, boom on the side of the hill. We had mortars coming in. The airstrip was getting hit.
John emerged from the bunker hungry and exhausted, but unhurt. Later that year, John's tour ended, and he boarded a plane for Okinawa, a flight John really doesn't remember.
I asked a girl about it later. She goes, "Oh, you guys are great." She goes, "You're quiet when you're taking off. Everybody's looking out because you could see stuff coming at you. You knew what it looked like. They're all looking out the window. And then we get at 10,000 feet, and you could feel the plane kind of start leveling off, and then the skipper would come on and says, we're out of range. And everybody goes crazy. She goes, but it only lasts about a minute, you know, and then you guys just fall asleep. And she goes, and you sleep for like 12 hours on the plane.
John's experience in Vietnam was more of an individualized one, going over by himself, joining his unit, and coming home by himself. Gary Bussell's journey was very different as a member of Company D, 151st Infantry, an Indiana National Guard unit that traces its history to before the Battle of Tippecanoe in 1811. Gary was working at Westinghouse in Muncie when he and a brother decided to join the Guard.
It was a way to get the commitment in. At that time, there wasn't a lot of news about Vietnam. It was kind of in its earlier period. So I joined the Guard in '64 and was married in '65. And so I was going to have a 6-year commitment of going to drills and summer camp once a year and have the military obligation put in.
Two friends of Gary's convinced him to join them at jump school rather than going to their usual summer camp. When they returned, they found out the unit had moved to Greenfield, where a long-range patrol unit was being formed. And when it came time for the next summer camp, the company trained in Panama, where they received some surprising news.
We're building our little overnight rest area one night, and this sergeant from the training committee says, "When are you guys going to Vietnam?" And we just grinned and says, "Oh, we're reservists. We're going to do this and go back home and go back to our reserve outfit." Well, the sergeant said, "Son, you don't understand. They don't put people through this school that don't go to Vietnam."
Following additional long-range patrol unit training, which included mountain rappelling and training with Army Rangers, the unit was set to deploy in November 1968. The Army intended to split them up among other units, but officials in Indiana objected.
The Army wanted to dissolve us, send us as individual replacements to different Army units. They knew the problem here. If you sent 200 guys from Greenfield in the same spot and something went bad, well, 6 o'clock news was bad enough the way it is. Imagine how it'd be in Indiana. But our state and Governor Whitcomb, Governor at that time, says, "Oh no, you took them as a set, you keep them as a set. We're not letting that happen."
Gary was in the communications section of the unit, which sent small teams into the field to locate and possibly contact the enemy. These men were highly trained and disciplined to make sure they were invisible to the enemy.
Our teams would be put out in several county-sized areas, scattered about in ambushes, 5, 6 men in a team, and would watch and wait and initiate on things you could handle. Guys would lay there and it'd take them 2-3 hours to eat their rations so that you don't make any noise, you don't have any fire, you don't smoke any cigarettes, you don't talk. Because the only thing you had going for you, these teams, was that they didn't know you were there.
If a team did make contact and needed additional support, extra resources were at the ready.
We had aerial assets that not many had. We had 4 to 5 Hueys on our compound. That's the school buses. And 2 to 4 Cobra helicopters, which were gunships, and they were committed to only us. They had to be.
Company D was a tight-knit group. The men were bonded by community ties. They were young and confident in their mission. But a few months into their deployment came a devastating reality.
I think it was about March we lost our first man. And all of a sudden, everything changed. Nobody said anything much. They looked at each other and tried to avoid straight eye contact. But you knew all of a sudden, this doesn't always happen to other people. It's March. We're going to November. This is going to happen again. Mood, style changed.
The only National Guard combat infantry unit to serve in the Vietnam War, Company D was the most decorated company-sized unit in a one-year period during the entire conflict. When his tour ended, Gerry returned to work at Westinghouse and attended night school at Ball State. His experiences in Southeast Asia changed his life for years to come.
What it did do in that age of 23 was reset your calibration on your whole value system. And that pretty much sticks with you the rest of your life about what's important and what's not. And when all the comforts are taken away from you for a long period of time, simple things become more valuable.
Company D 151st Infantry has a long and honored history of service. Robert Walradth was part of another unit with a special history, the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment. Robert's father was a World War II veteran, but that didn't influence Robert's joining the service.
Uncle Sam did. UF 67159878. I got draft papers. We all knew what was coming in our era and our time and day. All our buddies get together and we'd say, hey, you got your papers yet? No. Well, I got mine. Well, you know, sooner or later yours was coming.
Trained on the new and still classified M551 Sheridan at the Armored Force School at Fort Knox, Robert learned all the positions necessary to operate the tank, which could be important in the field.
You learn how to be a tank commander or a loader, a gunner, or a driver. You have to have that, because if you lose one of the four, then somebody else got to take over, and we make a decision real quick on how we adjust that.
When he was deployed to Vietnam, it didn't take long for Robert to know he was in a war zone. He didn't even have to get off the plane.
I landed in Benoit Air Force Base. And you could look down coming in the plane. When we landed, there was smoke pop, yellow smoke or green smoke pop, and bullets flying around. Of course, the bullets flying around is a little bit away from the area we flew into, but it wasn't all that. It wasn't as safe as what you'd think it would be.
Just 5 days in country, the tank crew got their first assignment and their first taste of just how dangerous their missions could be.
We went into Locked In. That's the first experience that we had going into the jungle. And our track, I was a gunner, hit a landmine. It kind of scratched me around a little bit and broke my nose and tore my nose up a little bit. Just cut right here in my eyebrow where some shrapnel come up and got me right there. And almost it just knocked me silly. And I couldn't come to my senses, and I didn't know what was going on.
Robert would be the victim of 2 more landmines as his unit spent a lot of time in the field on search and clear missions, looking for the enemy. Sometimes when they stopped for the night, the enemy would find them.
We lived in the jungle, you know. That was our home. We lived on the back of our tanks or under the tanks, sleeping at night, or have to watch, have night watches and stuff at NDPs. We set perimeters up, bust jungle down in the circles, and then set up our trip flares. And every once in a while, Charlie, which is the enemy they called Charlie, they'd put a little brochure on our trip flares on the wire at night and let us know they was around. It was pretty sharp.
Later in Robert's tour, when the regiment established their rest overnight position and suspected Charlie was nearby, they developed their own way to send a message. Don't mess with the 11th ACR.
One tank, well, I say track or tanks, would start firing, opening up. When the other people heard it, then they would open up. 2 Sheridans and 9 APCs per platoon, 3 platoons. Everybody opened it up at once. That's called a mad minute. We'd do that for 1 solid minute, and then we'd shut it down.
Near the midpoint of his tour, Robert made a decision that would change his life forever. He wrote to his fiancée and told her they should get married. They did, but it didn't all run smoothly.
I wrote her a letter, and I said, hey, we need to get married. Meet me in Hawaii, and I said, well, hopefully we'll get together. And we did. When I got off the airplane in Hawaii, she didn't even know me. I was so dark from the sun and the tan, and my hair was almost completely blonde. And she just kept, I think I almost walked right by her.
In mid-1970, the 11th was part of the incursion into Cambodia ordered by President Nixon, a large operation involving more than 50,000 U.S. personnel. Robert feels it could have made a dramatic difference in the outcome of the war.
It was bigger than what I ever thought in my life. I could stand up on my tank, or we could, which is our unit, and you could look as far as you could to the right or as far as you could to the left, and there's nothing but armor. We pushed them so far, he just kept pushing. It was just pushed them right back into their area. I mean, as far as we could go with them.
Robert's time in Vietnam was spent as part of a tight-knit tank crew. Even though he was part of a small civil affairs team, First Lieutenant Gerry Waite had a lot of autonomy on his missions. With a family history of military service dating to the 1700s, Gerry enlisted when he knew he would be drafted.
I was at the University of Illinois and my grades were abysmal. My draft board in Albion, Illinois told my dad that I was number 3 on their hit list for draft. So I quit school and enlisted, quote unquote, to do what I thought I might be able to direct what I wanted to do.
Following basic and advanced training, Gerry was sent to infantry school at Fort Benning, then jump school, where he broke his ankle. He was then assigned to a civil affairs unit and deployed to Vietnam in 1970.
Actually, I liked civil affairs. I had 90 hours in college, most of that in anthropology. I kind of imagined myself the social scientist, although I really wasn't at the time. But how to combine the Army and the military with what I really liked.
Attached to the 1st Marine Division, 29th Civil Affairs Company, Gerry spent his days in refugee villages, working to make the life of civilians a little more bearable in the middle of a war.
Quang Nam province had 500,000 people as a population, and half of those were refugees when I got there. We did return to village projects, we did medcaps, we organized medcaps, medical professionals who would go to refugee villages and treat people for all sorts of things. We were trying to basically rectify some of the wrongs that had been done and some of the damage.
For a 4-month period, Gerry lived on the inland island of Go Noi in the village of Phu Lac. For 6 months, the island had been heavily bombed, and one of Gerry's first jobs was finding and destroying unexploded ordnance.
In the first month I was there, I destroyed 2,500 bombs. I had kids there that called bomb finders. I'm still acquainted with some of them today. I would pay kids to find bombs for me, and then and oftentimes the bombs were booby-trapped, but the kids would show me where the tripwires were. And so we'd tiptoe up to a bomb and put plastic explosive on it and blow it up.
Even though he lived in the village and interacted with residents, security was always an issue. Just a short distance away was a no man's land, a free fire zone. Patrols would be sent out at night checking for signs of travel by people not associated with the village. Gerry didn't always need to go, but it was better than being in Phu Lac alone at night.
I didn't do it a tremendous amount. I sure didn't stay in the village by myself at night. If there was no place else to go, if they were going out, I went out with them. I was safer there than I was in the village. We had one Marine that was killed because he decided he wanted to sleep in one night, so he stayed in the bunker, and some kid threw a hand grenade in the bunker with him.
Gerry did have a good relationship with Miss Tien, a Vietnamese woman who often cooked for the soldiers of Go Noi. In one instance, he may have let his guard down a little too much.
There's a picture of me sitting in Ms. Tien's house, and I'm sitting there having a Coke in the afternoon or something of the sort. And my rifle is leaning up against the wall behind her. And a lot of Marines tell me, they said, I can't believe you let that woman get between you and the weapon, you and your weapon.
He visited with Miss Tien on a return trip to Vietnam, one of many he has made. On another of those trips, Gerry went back to Gonoy and found out some things that were going on in Phu Loc when he was there that may have changed his actions as a soldier.
The village was right next to a river, so we had a defensive perimeter around 3 sides, but not the riverside. People were coming and going at night in canoes, boats on the river we didn't even know about. People were tunneled underneath it. Apparently there were concrete reinforced tunnels under the village when we were there.
When his tour ended, Gerry not only brought home memories of his service in Vietnam, but a living legacy as well, from an orphanage on Gonoy.
4 nuns had about 2,000 kids, some older who helped and some younger, and lots and lots and lots of kids in diapers. My first wife and I corresponded about it, and we decided we would adopt the first baby in the first crib in the first building, and which we did. And so I adopted my daughter Leanne and brought her home babe in arms when my tour ended.
Even though our veterans' wide range of assignments meant they had varying amounts of cohesion with their units, each knew they had a responsibility to their comrades.
When you're there, the global concept of what you're into is not existent. It means nothing. It's the guy here, the 15 men you close to, or your team, your group, your people, and that's who you're there for. And that's the way it's got to get. You have to be committed to the folks you brought with you.
When you start getting into situations where everybody needs to congregate and get in together and pull together, you get along with people pretty quick. You bond. It didn't take long for us to bond each. If that didn't happen, then there was adjustments that was made, and it finally happened. So we took care of our own.
We always had a kind of a code of you take care of the Marine next to you, which if you're doing that, you're taking care of yourself. So you don't worry about you. You take care of the guy next to you. That will transcend into your unit. Then that takes care of people around you.
You have to trust the guys you're with. You have to be able to trust that they're covering your back and you're covering theirs.
As with other conflicts, soldiers return from Vietnam with unpleasant memories and the stress of being in a war zone. Although they may not have initially recognized the problem, keeping those feelings internalized led some to battle PTSD. Finding a way to cope could help, but some chose a different solution.
I didn't even know what PTSD was, and it came about later. And it's hard to explain. There's triggers and things that you had seen. Well, I'd seen a lot of stuff, but I didn't think it bothered. Apparently it does.
I don't think I was stressed when I was there. I don't think I felt like I was really in any sort of danger. But that's part of being young and dumb. But I do know that after I came back, and for several years after, I was really clinically depressed.
There's plenty of reasons to have problems, and we have guys that had problems. We had a suicide after he came home. And every person is going to handle everything a different way. Some guys never got over some of the injuries they received. You think of it then, but it cost them the rest of their life.
Finding a release can help a veteran cope with his post-war anxieties. For John, it has been music. As a professor at Ball State, Gerry has made several trips back to Vietnam, taking groups of students and veterans to experience a different culture, which has turned out to be an interesting mix.
Working with veterans and students in Vietnam, putting those two groups together, is really a lot of fun because the veterans oftentimes will open up about their experiences. The students are really interested, and although they're naive, and obviously the place is not the same at this point in time, it brings about some different sorts of reactions. My purpose in what I do is basically trying to educate people about the real Vietnam.
The doctor at Battle Creek comes up and he said, "You play the banjo?" I said, "Well, yeah." And he said, "Well, play it." So I played it. He goes, "Well, that's what you should do." He wrote it up. He wrote it up that I should play the banjo. I said, "The way you play, you need to do that." And actually, so I did, and I've been playing ever since. I've been having a great time.
It has been over 40 years since U.S. involvement in Vietnam ended. Looking back, our veterans have a mixture of impressions about the war, and they think of those who paid the ultimate price.
Every guy's Vietnam is different. It's totally different. You could have 4 guys in here talking about Vietnam, and you're going to get 4 different stories. Your Vietnam is totally different than anybody else's. And in common, yeah, we're all in Nam. We're going to be there for over a year. Might as well get used to it. So we did.
I'm proud to be able to serve our country. I have mixed emotions about, I don't like to lose at nothing. I'm a very competitive person. In the Vietnam veterans' minds, we could have won that war. There's no doubt in my mind, we could have won that war. That could have been ours.
An insurgency is just almost impossible to defeat, virtually impossible. And whether it's search and destroy, or it's pacification, or it's winning hearts and minds, or whatever it is, if you can't identify the enemy, you can't win. Vietnamese fought the Chinese for 1,000 years like that. They defeated the Chinese, it just took them 1,000 years. If we had known that history and understood that history and understood what an insurgency really looked like on a large scale, I'm not sure we would have been there.
From that period, 40-some years ago, there's about 6 guys that never got to go past 23. And for the next 30, 40 years, I'm back here working at the Westinghouse plant where something's going bad. Oh, the world's not right. I think back and think about, would Larkins or Smith, how would they like to have my bad day 30 years later? Just shut up and go on. You owe it to them to do right.